2021. I want to reassure you, our audience, our unusually intelligent and amazing audience, that the fact that I paused there on August does not in any way at all mean that I forgot what month it is for just a brief split second. No, I knew it was August because it's August. It's the month of Augusty things. What, Dorno, what the hell happens in August?
I think we take a break from all the month-long holidays. It's not some history month, it's not Pride month. I think it's just back to school sale month. That's it. It's just a retail month. And time
It's
for
it's not even like
everybody to
Leafs changing month.
No,
That's like,
August is the month where we celebrate. We've really enjoyed this summer, but it's enough of the heat and it's time to change seasons now.
oh, does it get cool this month? Does it cool
Uh
down? I mean, get.
compared to July, yes.
I mean,
Depends on
not
where
in
you live, I suppose.
Utah. In Utah, it's still, scorching hot.
Yeah,
Sometimes clear up until October, but you know,
yeah, you guys have two seasons, winter and construction.
yeah. Oh man, I love this state. Like, I feel weird saying this because they drive like idiots, not maniacs, idiots. Californians drive like maniacs. Utahs drive like idiots. But I love the people of this state. It feels weird to say, but man, the weather in this state is awful. I mean, this state is literally a desert. Uh, I'm going to take just half a second to say this. When people came to this state to settle in the Great Salt Lake Valley, it was an alkaline desert. They had to irrigate the land for 3 years just to leach the alkaline compounds out of the soil before they could even begin to plant crops. I mean, that's a hellish place to live where you have to irrigate for 3 years just so the poison in your soil won't kill the plants you're trying to plant. And now it's a pretty I guess fecund place, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Um so yeah, that's Utah. It's got the weather of a desert.
Yeah, you guys did all right for yourselves.
So
So,
how's your week?
my week's pretty good. Mostly work, I'll say. Getting back into the old swing of things and at the old 9 to 5. I don't want to get too current event and too political, but I foresee myself working from home indefinitely as companies are starting to insist on injecting harmful chemicals or potentially harmful chemicals in your body in exchange for the privilege of going into the office. And I'm not going to say anything more about that, but that's the news out here on the West Coast here.
This is not political, but it is hilarious. They had a Zoom meeting on CNN, and one of the dudes was caught massaging the monkey on camera. All of his coworkers saw it.
My goodness.
And the dude wasn't fired. Okay? They kept him on at CNN.
Yeah, CNN, I remember this story.
Because you can whip it and whip it good on a CNN company Zoom call. and still keep your job as a media personality at CNN. But 3 guys who are coming to work unvaccinated got summarily fired.
Strange days we live in. Strange days.
By the way, that Whip It Good was a Devo reference, in case we have anybody in the audience listening. Devo, it's a post-punk song from the 80s. Go check it out.
I'm sorry, I have to jump in now, but you have mischaracterized that song grievously.
Sure.
The impetus of that song was that you should go forward, move ahead. It was about Jimmy Carter hitting a very, very tough time in his presidency, and it was really about writing an ode to how Jimmy Carter could press on and ultimately overcome the doldrums that he was facing. And such as it is, it's an inspiration to us all to this day, how we can all climb out of our own sloughs of despond.
I was not trying to characterize the song. I was using the title as a euphemism.
But that's a wholesome. It's a wholesome song. It is a intrinsically wholesome song, and I'm just, I just wish we could. I almost wish we could start over now. I'm embarrassed that we even went there.
I never knew that about Whip It. I'm now inspired by Devo.
I'm done. That's it. That's me. The brain is shut down. It's time to bring the guests on.
Yeah. Hey, welcome
I
back
had a
to
great
the
week
show.
this week in one thing.
What?
Apparently, I still have HBO Max. I'm not saying that really super surprised me, but did kind of. It did kind of sneak up on me. So when the Suicide Squad came out this week, instead of having to go to the theaters, which I can't right now, I got to watch the Suicide Squad opening night on my TV without being charged anything else. Unlike Disney, who has the absolute gall to want to charge me $20 to see Black Widow and $20 to see The Jungle Cruise, what just came out. So I watched the Suicide Squad, and it was good. I enjoyed it. I recommend it to people.
I did not expect those words to come out of your mouth.
No, neither did I. I'm shocked. I'm floored. I enjoyed it. Somebody replied to me on Twitter and got all pissy about it and said, if this is what people think of modern movies, we're in trouble. I'm like, dude, it entertained me. It kept me entertained for 2 hours. I wasn't even thinking about plot holes and things like that. What else am I supposed to expect from an action movie, a superhero action movie? What else do I want from it? It entertained me for 2 hours. Am I supposed to have higher expectations than that from a superhero action movie? Because I've seen superhero action movies that didn't entertain me for 2 hours. I've seen ones that were awful and ones that were boring and ones that sucked so hard I wanted to retroactively erase them from the timeline. You know, I've seen Batman versus Superman. I saw the Justice League. You know, I know what bad movies are like. This one didn't suck. It was entertaining. Idris Elba did a great job. So I don't know. I don't know what else I'm supposed to expect out of it.
No, that's it. All right, let's talk D&D because it's literally my favorite topic of all time.
So just one other thing.
What?
Next month when Dune comes out in the theaters, I'll be able to see it first night on my TV because it's coming out on HBO Max. So I'll
Okay.
be able to tell you exactly how much that thing sucks or doesn't suck. Who the hell is Timothy Chalamet?
I don't know.
I mean, I know he's playing Paul Atreides in the movie, but who was he before that? Because he
Yeah.
looks like a 15-year-old girl.
You got me.
Did anybody in the chat know? Drop a response to the chat. Like, who was he before he was in Dune?
We'll find out if chat has anything to say. He was in that King film. I don't know what that means.
King film. Oh, we got joke responses. Of course we do. I expected that. No, you keep on saying D&D and you keep on being right. I know. You're right. Do it.
You hear me think about it. Yeah. Jeffro Johnson, thanks for coming on. It's so good to have you back on the show. I want to talk about D&D. Daddy Warping wants to talk about D&D. What do you want to talk about?
I came here to redefine role-playing games.
Okay, that's a tall order. Let me give a little background for anybody who isn't familiar with your saga. Is that okay, or were you planning on doing that?
Oh, I think saga is very much apropos here. Like if you've seen the movies about people climbing El Cap, this is definitely a struggle that is isomorphic to all the pitfalls and terrors and challenges that those men who overcame Yosemite's signature climb. This is the tabletop gaming challenge of the century, and it did not disappoint in any area.
Holy cow. We talked about it a little bit last week. You
can't not talk about it. That's how you know. That's how you know that there has been a shift in the gaming landscape and the way people think about it. With Appendix N, we put together a framework for like actually understanding the rules, and that was so effective and that was so useful at the table that after the release of that book, you could never talk about D&D without being fluent in the key concepts that were developed in that treatment. What's happening now is that it's happening again, but it's happening at like an even deeper level.
A deeper level. So let me rephrase what I learned from Appendix N was that although a lot of the OSR types who went back and rediscovered all the old rules and styles of play and everything, while they got a lot of the technical aspects of the rules right and rediscovered the fun games such as hex crawls and sandboxes and things like that, actually digging deep into the literary roots of Dungeons and Dragons helps you understand where those weird game mechanics and systems and characters and monsters came from. So I mean, that's a pretty fundamental change. It's sort of like not only what am I doing, but why am I doing it, or how did this come to be?
That's fair. That's fair. Most people, because they had a different understanding of fantasy than the creators of D&D, they will look at the things that the rules take for granted, and then they're all smart guys. They're all very, very smart guys, each and every one. And so they look at it and they're like, oh, that's not realistic, or that's not how fantasy works. And so then they immediately change the game to be more in line with what they think is good or correct or something that's in line with their imagination. So what's actually happening there when that process happens 9 times out of 10, or probably more like 99 times out of 100, you see someone that lacks the imagination necessary to play the rules as they were designed, because they can't imagine those rules making any sense at all. So when you go back and you read, you familiarize yourself with the literary resources of the game. Now keep in mind that at the time that this work was being done, what did the purists section of the OSR get accused of doing? We got accused of searching for the D&D, that we were going to like go back into these books and we were going to like piece together the D&D, the primordial D&D that presaged the actual game, and then we're gonna build a cult around this, and then people would suddenly they'd be playing like our weird Taliban version of the game rather than actually playing D&D. That was the accusation. But what really happens when you become familiar with things like where the paladin class came from and where the magic systems comes from and so on and so forth, all those things which are now very much old hat. But as you look into those sources, those foundations, you become able to interpret the rules in their own terms, which means you can begin the project of playing the game that actually got made in 1974 and in 1977, 78, 79.
That's fascinating. Sort of turns it on its head. I hate to follow up your story with another one, but yeah, my experience is the same. We're kids and playing around with D&D, and nobody really taught us how to play, but we sure loved our Lord of the Rings books and video games and TV shows. So it was like, yeah, I hate this spell memorizing thing. Let's just spell points. First thing everybody does to D&D is spell points, that sort of thing. And so and now we call that D&D, but if you really want to really think about it and go into the history, as you said, no, it's a different game and it might be fun, but let's find out what actual D&D is like and see what's good in it. That's my interpretation of your saga. Yeah. Although you're going way farther. You're trying to remake the whole thing.
Remake? No, it's
redefine. Sorry.
Well, we've rediscovered something that was lost. So imagine you got a group of guys in the year 2020 getting together, playing Advanced Dungeons and Dragons week to week, and just not stopping. And then like this is the thing that sets us apart from basically every other group I've heard about. Every other, there's like maybe one exception who goes. Rick Stump, of course.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to let his existence stop me from making the sweeping generalizations that actually correspond to reality. So when you have all these people coming together that have, because everybody in it had read my appendix N basically, and had gone in and read the books for themselves. And we were looking at the AD&D rules, which were, at the time very imposing. This is a game I've never heard of anyone actually playing it, except Rick. Most people, like James Malazewski, his take on it was that most people that played AD&D, they were playing basically basic D&D, but with more classes and more magic items and more monsters. But basically the gameplay, it was basic but with extra stuff. Most people, if the subject of playing AD&D by the book ever comes up, people's first response is, well, even Gygax didn't play that game by the book. It's this thing that's always framed as like nobody could do that. It can't be done. It can't be done. It's ludicrous to suggest that it could be done.
Yeah. Have you ever seen those grappling tables? No way.
Yeah. It's absurd. Why would anybody do that? Why would anybody? Yeah. So every time, thank you. That's exact. Every time that the rules got hard, what happened in our games was we would just be like, and I would apologize to some of the people there that were there to play a game and not necessarily do gaming archaeology, but I'd say like, look, we know there's a rule for this. We're going to stop and look it up, and we're going to figure it out.
And that's a fascinating part of it that you described that, because that's one of the biggest no-nos at the table. Like, you don't normally want to break the action. Most of the time you say, hey, just make a call and then we'll revisit it after the session. But you just stopped everything and you said, no, we're going to figure out how to actually play this game right now.
Yeah. And it wasn't easy. Gygax's writing is pretty dense. And there's always something to it. Like, every time we would go and try to apply significant aspects of the rule that we were unfamiliar with, we would get it, basically half right for a long time. And then it wouldn't be until like weeks later that you'd go back and contemplate the rules that we would see, like, oh wait, we were doing the -10 hit points rules wrong. That's actually in there. And then with the with the grappling rules, somebody threw those at me in the middle of a game just to because they were elite players trying to get one over on the DM. And but like it took several sessions to gain mastery. And so
the -10 rule is in AD&D.
It's in AD&D. The rule is that if you're at 0 exactly, then you're not dead. You're just out of commission. From that point on, you go -1, -2 each combat round, down to -10. If nobody tends to you by the time you get to -10, then you're dead. So it's a very, very narrow case. Early on in the game, we had people coming out of the dungeon all the time that were, mortally wounded and could recover. But the actual rule is that's only for the guys that are dropped to 0 hit points exactly. And then there's like a little bitty optional rule there that you could maybe expand that out to going down to -3. But we ended up never going back to that. So yes. And everything in the game is like that. I could see why people would want to play the basic, is because you don't want like the morale rule, right? You don't want it's like a whole page of stuff, and you're like, I just want to play D&D. That's you. That's your reaction. You're like, look, man, I just want to play D&D, man. Just right. I don't. And so it's not until you accept the fact that Gygax is a genius creator who knows more about what this game needs and where it's going than you do, that as you spend time with these rules, what happens is the thing that happens is the thing that everybody claims couldn't happen. Because I've heard countless people, even Frank Mintzer certainly said it, that you cannot learn D&D from the rules. If you actually spend the time, and when it gets hard, slow down and stay at it anyway. If you take the time, what happens is, as you do what Gygax says, you in fact become acculturated to the mid-70s miniatures gaming culture. And you start to this culture. This is like our big beef with the boomers, is that they failed to do this. Well, I'm gonna give one guy a pass on this. Gygax actually wrote down everything you needed to know in order to be assimilated into the culture that he and his peers had created. It's amazing. Yeah.
Holy cow. So I guess I just touched on the results of that. What was, because all I saw, I'm not on Twitter anymore, but I kept seeing these hilarious tweets from you and your players about crazy things that were happening in the game. And we tried to describe it last week, and we just did not give it justice. So here you are, you say, we're going to play AD&D by the rules. We're going to do our best to play them exactly by the rules, and we're just going to see what happens. So can you take me through sort of what are the things that you learned? You can start anywhere you like, but I'd ask from the beginning, what did you start learning from playing those rules? What was the first thing that emerged from that experience?
Right. Okay. It's hard because there's like literally 10 or 20 different things that were all happening at once. I guess there's two little insights that gave me the initial inspiration to really go for it. Besides the fact of seeing Sky Hernstrom pick up the DMG himself and just start running the game. I looked at him doing that, and like that was when it really hit me. It's like, no, I can do this. I can totally do this. Because I mean, if Sky's sitting there, like he doesn't care about the kind of things that I would care about. The things that I would use to say disqualify myself or disqualify the authenticity of my game. Like he just ran with it. And of course, and of course he did it with his style. You see it, on the one hand, this is one of those things where the rules really don't matter. You just dive in as soon as you say, okay, roll up your characters. Here you are in this world, and you can do anything. And then there's Modrons flying around on these skids and stuff. As soon as you're there, no, the rules aren't the main thing at all, and the fact that there are challenges aren't keeping you from the process of discovering what this world is. But just going back, I had a conviction that all of the supplements for the D&D game, particularly the adventure modules, were creating a game for D&D, a different D&D than the D&D described in the rules. And when I'd run Keep on the Borderlands, there was like a little small paragraph about the Lizard Man Mound in there on the way to the dungeon, and it's like a throwaway encounter. But I'd played several times with random people where they engage with that. That it's just a simple encounter. But like people would play with that, and they would think that was the adventure. They would work that. It would be like 2 or 3 hours. It'd be a fresh group of players. They'd have that encounter, and they were like, "Man, we're like gaming heroes. We beat the game. We won the adventure, Wow. And so you look at that, and you're like, well, how much do you need in terms of supplementary material or adventure design how much do you need to run AD&D or D&D or any kind of D&D? Like if that's all you need, like why are you spending hours poring over modules that are supplements for a game that isn't actually described in the rules? Like you go back, you look at any 70s rule set. Metamorphosis Alpha is a great example of this. But they all assume, oh yeah, the DM, okay, it's going to be a little bit of work, but like he's basically got to create the entire campaign, right? And for me, like who's a procrastinator, an improviser, somebody who pantses everything, it's like, gosh, I don't know what the players are going to want to do. But when you realize like that you run, for months, the Trollopolous campaign was literally. The characters find this one monster wherever in the dungeon or in the wilderness, and like you would get an entire adventure out of one monster manual entry, and everything else would just sort of start. It keep percolating, it keep growing, it keep developing little bit by little bit until like this whole world was coming into focus. And of course, the key rule that allows a campaign world to come into focus is, of course, the 1-to-1 time rule, which literally completely changes the way D&D works at a fundamental level.
Can you describe that one? Because I think I tried to do it justice last week, and I don't know that I did it well.
Actually, let's, instead of starting there, because it's axiomatic. It's axiomatic to D&D. It's sort of like the parallel postulate in geometry, where if you change that, you get an entirely different system of geometry than the Euclidean planar geometry. I'm sure this is self-evident to everyone in the audience here, right, guys?
Specifically, the rule is 1-to-1 time during downtime.
Well, hey, I did ask for a slide. Let's start backwards and work. Let's start at the end result and work backwards to the axiom from which all of this derives. So let's take a look. Yes.
Okay. Okay. Here's a lot of Gygaxian text here. Shall I read it?
Oh, please, by all means.
As with most other role-playing games, this one is not just a single experience contest. It is an ongoing campaign, with each playing session related to the next by results and participant characters who go from episode to episode. As players build the experience level of their characters and go forth seeking ever greater challenges, they must face stronger monsters and more difficult problems of other sorts. And here the Dungeon Master must likewise increase his or her ability and inventiveness. While initial adventuring usually takes place in an underworld dungeon setting, play gradually expands to encompass other such dungeons, town, and city activities, wilderness explorations, and journeys into other dimensions, planes, times, worlds, and so forth. Players will add characters to their initial adventurer as the milieu expands, so that each might actually have several characters, each involved in some separate and distinct adventure form, busily engaged in the game at the same moment of game time. This allows participation by many players in games which are substantially different from game to game, as dungeon, metropolitan, and outdoor settings are rotated from playing to playing. And perhaps a war between players will be going on, with battles actually fought out on the tabletop with miniature figures one night, while on the next, characters of these two contending players are helping each other to survive somewhere in a wilderness.
Okay. All right. Question for you guys. Have you ever played a game like the one that is described in that paragraph?
No.
Never.
Right. Nobody has. Like, for 40 years, the OSR has been picking over, every module, every obscure magazine article, and it's certainly for 15, 20 years, we've been blogging about this game D&D, and this passage, it's not an obscure passage in an appendices. It's not a random passage in a weird corner of the DMG. Okay. It's not something he wrote in a weird fanzine. That passage appears in page 7 of the Player's Handbook, in the section called The Game, where he is setting up the players of AD&D, which was the top dog of RPGs for 10 years, with every single magazine article and Dragon elucidating and expanding on the weirder and more incomprehensible rules elements of that game. This section is in the very, very beginning of the Player's Handbook. And it's saying this is the game that everybody's talking about. This is the game that everybody wants to play. And you guys are telling me you've never played that game. That's it.
It's true. It's true. I've never played that game. I can understand it. The description makes sense, but no. Ever since I started in as an adolescent, like many of us, and it was just getting together and we'd tell stories. It'd be more like a superhero game. Like, we'd tell these sagas about these characters that we make, and if the character dies, maybe you make another one, or maybe you quit the game or something like that. It was never, we never had one person who stuck it out with one campaign setting. To us, a campaign meant this world might persist, but it exists for your stable of characters. Like we're just going to play this world, and when these characters sort of either defeat the big bad guy or their character stories wrap up, we're probably just going to call it. Like, that's enough for now. Let's go play something else, right?
Yeah, right. So what one-to-one time is, and this is the most important thing about it. On one side, the first little phase, which I heard you guys talking about this last week, your first aha moment when you start using it is, of course, the monsters get recovery time from when the play. So the 15-minute workday dies. When you add one-to-one time and the players do a dungeon delve on Tuesday night, and then a week later they come back and they're like, okay, we want to go back to that same dungeon. They've had a week to recover real time, but then in the game time, the monsters have had a week to maybe get some more allies, or maybe make some traps, or change the dungeon a little bit. And so in that regard, the game becomes much less static. And again, if you go back to that exact same spot 6 weeks later, then there's no telling what you're going to find there. So the first thing that happens with one-to-one time is that the world takes on an independent existence from merely entertaining one particular group of characters. But as it goes on, when you have players that are told, no, you can't play your favorite character this week because he's injured, or no, he's got to train for 2 weeks because I graded you poorly on your role playing of a magic user. You used a dagger to kill those guys instead of a spell. I'm going to mark you down, so it's going to take you longer to train. As you get into those kind of things, the party combination starts changing. Instead of being like the Fellowship of the Ring, where you've got like this sort of pantheon of character archetypes that are joined at the hip and always in the spotlight. What happens with one-to-one time is like every week it's like a totally different combination of characters. And furthermore, as in the case of one of my undead scenarios, the players come in and this part of the game that had stymied them, like they had gotten into the game and they leveled their first characters, and then they became like really conservative. Like they didn't want to lose their characters on something stupid, so they stopped. They became over attached to their players, I think, and became over cautious to the point where it wasn't any fun for me to run the game anymore. But when you swapped out all their favorite special snowflake characters, and then replaced them with like totally stupid things that they don't normally play that just so happened to be perfectly fitted to this one scenario that had embarrassed them a couple of months back, well, they wrecked my dungeon. They wrecked my one-page dungeon so bad that I had to rethink how I was even planning the campaign anymore, because anything I would make for the campaign, by the time it would get into play, the players and the characters and everything that were in motion, they were totally different. But all that aside, that's just like the basic level of what one-to-one time does to your game. Where one-to-one time becomes beautiful is when it produces the type of gameplay that you see in this paragraph here that we've just read, where you've got multiple active characters all over the map, doing all kinds of things concurrently. What happens when you go there is, instead of the game world being this thing that exists only to entertain a particular group of adventurers, right? In order to give them the impression that they had an adventure, right? That was fair and that was everything else. Like, one more tangent here. I want to call that this is one more basic level benefit to the one-to-one time. Is it puts so many things in motion at once and so many elements in the game at once. Kenneth Haidt had this thing called Adventure Pizza, which was a column in Pyramid way back in the 90s, I think. And so he'd like throw out like 10 dumb ideas and say, look, if you put all these things together, you can have an adventure pizza, right? With these ingredients. And he would like, and it would always be like, wow, how did that guy get so smart that he could like make an adventure out of anything, right? Well, like a one-to-one game, where you've got the time element of it, and where you have the players have total autonomy to do whatever they want. That game, like I used to, like back in the day, I would like have like 6 adventure seeds for any module I was running, in order to give the players the impression that they had autonomy in the game world. Well, under 1-to-1 time and in an all original campaign with no module, what we ended up with was, when there's actual autonomy and an actual living campaign world that has its own existence apart from the players, then you get so many things that are generated over time. Like I don't open a session telling the players, oh, hey, here's the adventure hooks that you have to choose from. The players come into the session and they're talking about, hey, you remember that thing that happened 6 sessions ago? Yeah, like let's go do something with that. And they get an argument over like 3 or 4 different things before I can even update them on what's happening in the wider world, based on rumors and things like that. So you lose control of the game. But yeah, back to this paragraph. 1-to-1 doesn't become what it really is until you have multiple independent parties acting in the same campaign with total autonomy. When that happens, instead of like an adventure that is created in what we call stop time, where you don't have 1-to-1 time, like at the end of the session you just stop it and then come back the next day, those create a point. The campaign world in that context becomes a point. If players have total autonomy and 1-to-1, and there's only one party, you get a line in terms of what your campaign is. Your party is doing like there and back again journeys all over your campaign map. You don't know where they're going to go. You don't know what they're going to do, but you just have like this sort of like spiraling of this one little group going through there. When you've got multiple independent parties, maybe also with multiple independent characters, say somebody's assassin character is operating in downtime to go spy out a given group, or maybe assassinate somebody there, or get intelligence and then return back to the other group and bring that to the game. As you increase these number of independent variables in the campaign setting, you get something fundamentally different than what everybody else thinks of as adventuring. What you get is a model of a fantasy world. And when you add it to a couple of other things that we discovered in the process, everyone says that they're playing D&D wrong because they want to get a better narrative, a better story. They want to get something like what they think fantasy stories are. I'm saying they all stink at that. Like they all failed wrong. They wanted to play a Tolkien-esque type game. You can't play a Tolkien-esque type game without 1-to-1 time and without independent parties moving around on the same campaign map. And I'm going to cite as the example of that is, of course, the Two Towers, where you have the breaking of the Fellowship. Conventional D&D cannot handle this type of scenario. 1-to-1 time is so useful in helping you manage and regulate independent actions, and keep them all with the exact same resources. It allows you to play a game that after you like write down everything that happened, you end up with a story, a narrative that is as complex and as hyper specific even as the action that you see in the Two Towers, where you have Frodo and Sam going off to do their adventures, and then you have Merry and Pippin getting kidnapped and doing their adventures, and then you have Aragorn and Gimli and Legolas going off and having their adventures. There's no reason that you couldn't take that and run with it in a regular campaign. Just absolutely none. Have I persuaded you on that? Like, can you see that is the case, or like, is there? What am I missing on that?
Okay, so I understand how allowing for multiple characters allows something like the breaking of the Fellowship to happen. Take me from take me from A to B. Not that I don't understand, but I think it might help to spell it out. What one-to-one time, once again, where every day that passes in the real world, a day passes in your fantasy world. How does that cause those things to happen? How do you get from A to B? In other words, how does one-to-one time make that happen?
Well, it adds an entirely new dimension to the gameplay. Like if you went into a dungeon that only had one dimension, right? That it was just a tunnel, right? That would be kind of a boring game, right? Even though most adventures for 3.5 era D&D are basically isomorphic to a tunnel. But no, that's intrinsically bad D&D for reasons that the OSR has gone into ad nauseum. Am I right?
Yeah.
Right. And a hex crawl is going to be two-dimensional. If you can go anywhere on a hex crawl, right? You're there. That's two-dimensional gaming. But when time is added as an element, when we ran the super insane July Trollopolous patron level domain game, continuous play game last month, I think that illustrates this. You set all these pieces on the campaign map, and you think, oh yeah, it's just going to be like regular D&D. It's just at a larger scale, no problem. What we found out when we moved up there is like on a lark. I had just drawn on the campaign map 6 caves, right, for the Caveman Federation, and the time and space rules, right, for this simple idea, like, oh yeah, there's like 100 cavemen at each cave, and they've got some dinosaurs and stuff. Yeah, let's just go play. Let's go. What's actually implied by what I created on the campaign map at the 30-mile hex level, there was actually a tremendous amount of logistical problems baked into what I threw out there, in terms of like how these cavemen are going to communicate with each other, or whether they have to have runners or something going. Well, how long does it take to get a message from one cave to another? Oh, it's a long time, And then with the mushrooms, right? Like we played for like 3-4 weeks straight, and the mushrooms like move to one place, which takes a week, and then they send some dudes to a couple of other places that ends up taking 6 or 8 days, and the Tharks, the Martians out in the desert, are sending these skiffs of warriors to go scout things out. And like for the setting of the game, like it took most of the game for like one scout trip to go check out Trollopolous and then return back to the Thark Empire to tell them what they saw. And then finally you had Macho Mandoff, who started off the game in Trollopolous, and he has like this terrible disaster. He gets kidnapped by John Wick, and then he's doing one thing, and then he goes on one little mission and comes back, and by the time he comes back, Trollopolous is like literally a different place. And he goes to another place and accomplishes something, comes back, and then he's thinking, hey, what am I going to do? What am I going to do, with these 100 pugmen that we just got from this keep we conquered, and it's like, oh, hey, you know what? Let's dump them in the Goblin City, right? Let's just dump them inside Nilbog, right? So like when he makes that decision, and the world is in motion, and things are developing on their own in spite of him, like I don't, in that moment, I don't think, okay, all right, you've gone to the Goblin City and you got 100 pugs, and you're going to go do something really awesome. Now let me make this a really great adventure story for you. I'm going to build an adventure story for you right now that is like perfectly balanced to your skill level and everything else. What he got was what was there. That was a result of like 10 different people making decisions that he had no idea what happened, right? Mm-hmm. So at that point, the beauty of it, like of it all, is well, it's sort of like the quantum ogre, right? Because like when you're playing a conventional game and you've got one encounter that you have prepped, and so the players go in the forest and like, did they go left or right?
Sure,
And
it
then
doesn't matter. They're going to encounter that. Yeah.
okay, in when you have an actual world model operating in the background that your players don't know about, not only do you have objective answers to every single thing that they wouldn't even think to ask, but the people that have divination spells of any kind, or clairvoyance, or clairaudience, or any of those kind of like psi type spells that give information about stuff that's going on. I guarantee you, like when you have a patron level game in operation, there are uncountable things happening on the map that would be really very important to anyone making decisions on the game. Like now with a real model running, you don't like make something up and then bend the world to produce an adventure that suits what you think would be fun, right? What you do is like, oh, you're using a clairaudience to check out this one square where you think something interesting might be happening. Oh, I can give you a hint about what's happening there that will inform what. So like everything is objective. Everything, the small decisions that you make in the game with no information turn out to be hugely interesting, at least on the GM side, even when you don't know what all is actually, when you don't even have an informed decision from a game design standpoint, right? For the players, this should be like, this doesn't make any sense. Like you're in terra incognito now. So
it sounds like it's sort of the epitome or the end result of the story being an emergent property of the game. The common sort of dungeon master is either a storyteller or a wannabe game designer, and they're trying to craft a game experience. And one-to-one time forces you into a situation where you can't just twist reality around to fit any preconceived narrative or preconceived game design. It's simply a framework through which by enjoying the game, we create a narrative.
Right. Well, when we play this way, you are creating a simulation of a fantasy world that operates on its own. It has a life of its own. You're putting in domain level, name level characters, people with entire armies. You can drop them into this environment, which from doing wilderness adventures and everything else, how to move around in this environment, right? You know how much time everything costs and things like that. But when I'm going to take you back to the dawn of the hobby with the Braunsteins, right? The dungeon master is the weak link of role playing. So everything that you've seen that butters up the sacrifice of the DM and the hard work that they do to make a game for people to play in, and how smart these smart boys really are. Okay, dude, the dungeon master is the weak link. Okay, you as a dungeon master are never, ever going to be smarter than 6 people thinking independently. Okay, so you as a dungeon master, you aren't going to create this escape room for your players to pretend to play in. You're going to set up a world. You're going to give them total autonomy, and you're going to let the model run its course.
Okay, yeah. So in terms of, let's talk about practically running the game. So I think we've got a good picture of how one-to-one time lets you better model this fantasy world and allows the players the freedom and autonomy that makes for a great game. That I agree with. What is that good for on the Dungeon Master side? What does that help you do, and what challenges does it create that are different from what you'd expect?
You just Yeah, I'll tie this back to the Bronstein to describe this. Uh, when you look at the early rule sets and you think, oh, I've got to make these adventures, right? That's a lot of work to make a perfect adventure, right? When you don't have any of the talent. Well, the reality is that your personal creation doesn't have to be anything like a professional gaming product in order to be successful. And in fact, it's probably better if it's really, really crappy, because then you're willing to like go where the game actually wants to go, and you're not out anything when you reorganize things to fit with what your players are actually choosing session after session. So instead of like doing all this investment to make the perfect dungeon and then making your players play it right, you have the freedom to just follow things as they develop organically themselves. The old Bronstein from the dawn of the hobby, the guy, like it was like a sort of a precursor to a war game, right? It was sort of a pre-game to the war game, and like to figure out the local situation. The guy who set this up, like 6 or 7 people took on different roles of people in the town, like the mayor, the librarian, the sheriff, or who knows, whatever. And what he would do was like he would talk to each one individually and say, okay, here's what's going on. What do you do? And then he'd bring another one in. Here's what's going on. What do you do? And like so there was no RPG rules to really govern this. It was like purely like, they could do anything. Well, what was happening when he was talking to each one individually is like all the rest were like talking to each other in the other room, having a blast, plotting and scheming and like trying to set things up to trick each other, right? And the game went totally out of control. I'll tell you this, that type of game doesn't require any kind of like great game design skill to set up. It doesn't require a genius, like a wannabe fantasy writer. It doesn't require that type of person to make. Like, it's literally just think up like some weird, unstable situation, turn these roles over to people to operate independently as far as they want, make it wide open for them to do whatever they want. And like, here's the thing, the group becomes more intelligent collectively than what any one designer or dungeon master could ever come up with.
Got it. What you said about the players taking over and taking control, or the DM losing control, and a couple of comments in chat. Judd Goswick has a great point. I think the best gift a GM can have is proactive players whose characters have clear agendas. So I want to touch on that and get your opinion, because I think what you're working up to, and sort of the message I'm getting from people like you and Joy of Wargaming, John Mollison, and Sky and everybody, is the primacy of the player. That we've been looking at the game as a dungeon master centric game, what with celebrity dungeon masters on the internet and these great pre-run modules that you can play, and the encouragement of dungeon masters to write their own cool world building story and everything like that. Let's turn that on its head. Like, let's talk about the primacy of the player, because a group of players who are, and this is my favorite part of being a dungeon master, when I have a group of players who are genuinely interested and see the world as a functioning world and just want to interact with that. They're not there to be entertained by anybody else but themselves. I guess I didn't really have a specific question to that, but that's where I see all of this scholarship going. Is that something that you're conscious of? Is that something that you're thinking about?
Yeah. It's when you put the players, like, again, it's total autonomy. When most dungeon mastering questions that you see, even in old dungeon Dragon magazines from the 80s. It's like, hey, my players are doing something awesome. How do I get them to play what I want them to do? Right. Like that's basically all the questions. The fantasy world, in order to be birthed, it requires way more independent moving parts than what the average game session does. It requires a scene, and not just you and your 3 or 4 friends. Okay. And I know a lot of people like they've got really, really close friends, and they played long campaigns with their 4 or 5 best buddies, and it was great, but I'm just going to say that's not the type of game that Gary Gygax describes in this paragraph that we have on screen right now. I'm going to talk about anti-fragile gaming here in this context. When you have the ability to run one party or character out, say he's on like a 40-day wilderness adventure, and he just goes out and he does this awesome thing, but then it's like, nope, for 1 month you've got to do something else now, right? And then maybe 1 or 2 other parties come into being on other parts of the map, right? And then now you've got players that have characters on different parts of the map. They're thinking about the world not in terms of like this one character anymore. They're thinking about, for any session in the future at that point, what's the most exciting thing that this campaign has to offer, right? Like if that guy went 40 days into the future and like made it to sort of like a safe space, and then he turned out, then there like crazy more awesome stuff was happening on other parts of the map due to other interesting things that other players were putting into the game or creating, or situations that just came from the random tables and so forth. When that happens, right, every session now becomes sort of this opportunity for the players to play the best possible game that your campaign can produce. So the guys that are limited to one variable, one party, they're always like trying, like, how can I break the game? How can I break player autonomy in order to make this one little rinky-dink thing interesting? When it can't. There's a physical limit to how interesting a linear game can be. But multivariable gaming, right, with different players per character, every time you sit down to a session, is it going to be, is it going to be a wilderness trek? Is it going to be a dungeon crawl? Is it going to be a town adventure? Is it going to be some of all 3? Is it going to be a big miniatures battle? Is it going to be, what is it? Or is it going to be player versus player? Is it, oh no, we're going to like do this set of characters. You've now, like, in software development, I'm sure you know about A/B testing, where you put 2 different things in front of the same group of different groups, and you see which one are people preferring, right? This becomes like an engine for you to find out the best gaming that your campaign can produce, and it all runs entirely on total player autonomy and multiple players per character.
Well, I think there's another thing too that we were sort of talking around right now. It also presupposes competent, well-adjusted players who, quite frankly, enjoy each other's company or enjoy interacting with each other.
I'll go further than that. Everything that you've looked at in terms of because like most conventional dungeon mastering advice, like Robin Laws and other big guys like that, like, and certainly the magazine articles and the blog posts, like people really want to break down the different types of player, right? And certainly Ron Edwards, right? Are you a gamist? Are you a narrativist? Are you a simulationist? All right. The reason that D&D as designed was so successful as a game was it didn't matter what type of player you were or what type of player your group was, right? If that campaign is running, if it's a running campaign, and some rando group just wants to sit in, okay, you're prepared to run a game for anybody, anywhere, anytime, and it doesn't matter what they want. Everything is possible. Anything that they could want is in that space. And even if they're not balanced against the other players, that's what another thing we saw with the big patron game last month was that I had level 22nd level magic users walking around on the map. I had level 11th magic users. I had people with armies running around. I had second level and third level characters operating in that exact same environment and able to have a really good time doing whatever they wanted, and there were opportunities for them to be a part of like game session, well, not even game sessions, but D&D conflicts that we're going to be talking about for years, right? So it's this model, when you move away from the single spotlight, the auteur module scenario created for your 6 best friends, and you open it up and it's like, no, I'm running a campaign that can accommodate anyone. Like literally, we can move between every possible type of D&D play. We can even integrate every possible type of D&D play at the same time. The results from all of these activities they don't conflict. You've got no, and how they fit in time and space and resources and everything else. And you go back, you look at the cover of the original booklets for D&D now. I'm going to take you back to the dawn of the hobby. If you look at OD&D, what's it say on the cover? It says, rules for fantastic medieval war games, campaigns playable with paper and pencil and miniatures figures, right? I used to look at that and I used to think, you know what? They just didn't have the term role-playing game yet, They'd invented role-playing games, but they didn't have the term for it yet. And so they just used the only language that they knew. Well, that's not actually the case. They knew exactly what they were talking about. And this is what we're talking about here as a campaign. A campaign is not a set of linked scenarios. A campaign is somebody's basement where 20, 30, 40 people are coming over any random night. Okay? That's what a campaign is. And no matter who comes over, you can make a game in that campaign, and it's going to feed into the campaign's lore, the campaign's overall state, and these people are going to be growing and contributing to and developing little corners of this thing, and that's what it is. You can't run D&D as written unless you can harness the creative potential of more people than what people tend to assume is the norm for playing RPGs.
Taken to mean our sort of current paradigm of 4 to 6 people sitting around a table once a week, getting together.
Yeah,
and
you're never going to get there. You'll never play D&D with that group. Although if you went total autonomy, and if you went multiple independent characters per player, you are going to start approaching something closer to what Gygax did. And then once you get it, once it takes off, like watching people who endure other people's boring campaigns, when they get into a campaign where they're not in a story and where what they do has an impact on this campaign world, and they actually have influence on it, and they can do anything they want, right? It's amazing what happens is that they actually start having fun, right?
Yeah.
And when you don't have that autonomy because the DM doesn't have the skills to accommodate it, right? It's just painful. It's just painful. I don't know how people can do it. So even with a small number of people, you can get those multi-variables going. You have to give up the single party in the spotlight. you have to force, when you've got training and injured people, you have to force them to come up with new characters. The guys in the Trollopolous came originally, they didn't want to do that. I had to persuade them to try it before this. Now the people that played that way, they can't imagine going back because this works so well. But yeah, once you're at that stage, the next stage up, right, as your world takes into focus, you're going to get tired of your domain level player characters, your big patron type people, the people who give up quests and missions and things like that and hire the player characters to do things. You're going to get tired of them being just this static thing that exists only to make this one kind of scenario that you had in mind work. At some point, you're just not going to be satisfied with that, because when the pugmen in the sewers are more interesting than your major NPCs that you have in your game, right? Because they actually are making intelligent choices in response to what actually happens in the game. You're just not going to be satisfied with that anymore. And of course, as like Chanticleer found out, you can integrate people that can't even sit in at your sessions to play these roles, or to inform these roles, or to give direction to these higher level roles. That really makes the campaign world real in a way that scenario driven play just is never going to touch. Like just right now, if the Tharks in the desert were going to come after Trollopolous, right? Like, I have a really good idea right now what an Assassin's Guild and 11th level cleric and 11th level magic user can do if they put their heads together. All right, like I've seen all that stuff happen in the PvP stuff, and like it's yeah, the gameplay itself informs your imagination so that you can successfully think in higher levels and larger scopes and in more and more sophisticated scenarios. Did I lose you?
Here we go. Sorry, I was on mute. I wanted to ask a question. It's a little bit veering off the topic, but we're getting on towards the end of the show anyway, so it's time for Potpourri. That's where we ask random questions just because we're kind of curious. Do you use the AD&D Psionics rules?
Some, not a whole lot. Sky Hernstrom's character got the drop on the guy that was going to blast the party back when I was super excited about that. So that particular NPC fizzled. Ogma's character used psionics to hack certain rooms of Neilbog when that particular location was introduced last year. So it comes up. One great thing about psionics is that, when you've only got like 2 and 3% chances of getting it, right? When you have multiple characters per player, the chance of getting psionics in your game actually has a much higher chance of happening because you have such a turnover between the body count and the number of characters in play that you will get to enjoy those rules. So yeah, one psionic creature ate the intelligence of a cleric character in the Undead Quarter very, very early on. That was the end of one second level cleric that never really got too far in the game.
And do you use the rules where some like divination spells can trigger psionic creatures or draw them in or whatever?
Those are super, super, super cool rules. I've looked at it. The chances of it happening, well, first off, there's a lot more spells that can trigger that than you would think. Like some of the spells that trigger that are kind of surprising. But on the other hand, it's like you have to be the timing is kind of funny, right? Like you do the check, and if it's and generally you take, like, what do you check, like once an hour or once every 6 turns, which is an hour. Somebody in the chat will tell me if I'm like totally wrong, but the timing of the thing has to be just so it was just weird enough that like you're not going to check for those types of things very often, unless like it's it's just really wonky. So they come up less often than you would think when you would do that check. And so that result never upset the game. But man, if you ended up having a game session where that did happen, allowing the dice to like totally redefine what you were going to do that session, that definitely has never gone wrong. This is where super significant campaign elements are born, is when you allow the dice and the random tables like that to just totally put the drop the caveman army in your lap, as it were.
All right, I want to think about that some more, so I'm just going to have to set that aside because I can't stop talking in the middle of the show. That's kind of one of the things that is my job. I had another couple of questions while John was on the way out, but fact is we are out of time.
Are we?
John? Yeah,
Hello.
we are way out of time.
Way out of time. I could talk about D&D all day. Sorry about that. My internet just died out on me. I did have one relevant question for you, Jeffro.
Awesome.
So I'm not going to say I'm a firm believer, but I understand the logic in what you've explained so far. And so I'm excited to try a game with one-to-one time, or step in on someone else's game just to see what it's like. Because as a DM, I appreciate it when players have autonomy and they have their own initiative. As a player, I do appreciate. I'm the type of guy who likes to throw a monkey wrench into the DM's machine and see what breaks. So I would love that on a personal note. But what about the people who get together with their buddies for beer, pretzels, and D&D every week? They don't really, the DM doesn't really want to do necessarily world building or work or everything like that. Or maybe they have a persistent world. Maybe they play stop time or whatever. What can one-to-one time do for them? Or what lessons have you learned that they could take with them so that they could play a little bit closer to what D&D was originally played?
They could, if they do what I'm outlining here, they can have the inner conviction that they have actually played D&D, and that therefore they're entitled now to an opinion about D&D because they've actually played it. There's nothing worse really than I've tried to be more positive throughout this, but let's just talk about all the people who are going to have reasons why not, or like, oh, I only have 2 hours a week to play. That's one that we get now. So there's no way. Like, no, you could get a real campaign out of 2 hours a week if you added in just a little bit of downtime, a little bit of like continuous play on the side. I don't play D&D. But like, what if we're in the dungeon and we run out of time and like, can't we just stop and pick it up and pick it up the next week? Like, well, no, I'm sorry. Do you want to run a campaign or do you want to run fake D&D? Mm-hmm. At some point, like, I mean, just think about this. Like, I got all these games on my shelf, right? And I have never sat down to play the game these other games, war games, board games, Euro games, you name it. I've never sat down to play those with anyone that are like, hold up, man. You're actually going to play the rules? What? I've never gotten that question. Like, oh, you know what? You could play Settlers of Catan by the rules, but like, man, you're just limiting your creativity when you do that, man. Like, never heard that, never once, right? Oh, you know what? Rules are more important to you than just having fun, right? Okay, you're listening to a very, very weak culture that lacks the imagination to see where real D&D leads. Okay, so that in and of itself is contemptible. It's just gross. It's a fake hobby that has attached itself to gaming. I don't care about these people. They're completely irrelevant. They're not ready to play at this level. They're just not. They need to go to the gym. They need to go outside. They need to learn how to comport themselves when they talk to a pretty girl. They need to do all of these things. If they can do that for a few years, maybe then they will be ready for Dungeons and Dragons. But until then, no, there's no half measures. There's no way to get some of the benefits. They have to let go a great deal of their arrogance and weakness and, frankly, their grossness to even begin going down this path.
My experience is the same, and I didn't expect to agree with all that, but when let me put it this way from my perspective. When I opened my mind, when I came to the OSR stuff with an open mind, and I never played much OSR. I'm not into drawing maps on graph paper all day. I've tried that. That's not me. But when I came to it with an open mind and discovered, okay, there is an actual game here and fun and enjoyable story emerged from that game, well, then I accepted it as a valid thing. I don't necessarily need to tell anybody, hey, you're doing D&D wrong, but I will say now, you like the modern game, right? That's fine. I'm glad you find it fun, but it's not D&D. It's branded D&D, and you might find it fun, but it's not the same thing.
You don't need a session 0 to play.
That's it.
Play Commands and Colors Ancients. If I want to play a war game, I don't need a session 0. If I want to play a Euro game, I don't need a session 0. If I want to play either of those games, I don't need a rule 0, right? You don't like all of this stuff. It's a tell that you've got a fake hobby. All of these people that tell me like, hey man, you're playing by the rules, like that's so uncreative. Like, nope. That's a big nope. You can recreate the exciting things that I talk about here because I can give you very, very clear instructions on what to do to how to produce the results that I have enjoyed. All of these smart guys who can house rule, who like, oh, I've got the perfect set of house. I tried the real D&D, but like these house rules work better for me. Those guys, fudging is okay. Fudging is okay. Yeah, there's times for it. Yeah, fudging is okay. No. How can I can't recreate your judgment in the table without some sort of description of how to play a game. At some point, you have to start playing a game. So I would say like no compromise with these people on any area, because all of these compromises are about creating a non-game that is not replicable. And also, frankly, it's not as good. It is not as fun. It's not as interesting. It's fake. It's just plain fake.
I agree. I could tell stories why, but I think we've all been in those types of games where And okay, well, background. I played a lot of D&D in the past year or during 2020 with someone who's a very smart guy, very good game designer. He's professional game designer, and frankly, I would trust him to write a better D&D than Wizards of the Coast. But no matter how good and smart the DM is, when he stops mid-session and says, "You know what? That rule's that doesn't make sense. It offends my sensibilities, or it's just plain bad game design." Whether you could objectively say so or not, sometimes I just want to put my pencil down and be like, "Hey, can we just play Dungeons and Dragons? Even if it's this non-game 5th edition, we don't need to tailor everything to your specific game or sensibilities or anything like that. Like, there's a game there, and for years people have enjoyed the game. Even the new non-game people have enjoyed it. But session 0, you mentioned, is the big red flag. That's the canary in the coal mine. If you get together with a bunch of people and you say, "Hey, we're going to get together for a couple of hours every week. Let's nail down exactly what everybody wants so everybody can be happy." Then you're not playing the same thing. What happened to if you like you mentioned board games, if you walked over and slapped a box of Risk or Monopoly down on the table and be like, "Cool, welcome to our weekly game club. Grab a drink, pick a color, let's play," right? Everybody knows that you're playing Monopoly or something like that. We don't need authors. We don't need storytellers. We don't need wannabe Matthew Mercers who think they're going to get a star team of actors to be in character nonstop. And on a personal note, no, I don't want to talk to any of your NPCs ever. That's ones I acknowledge. That's just me. A lot of people love that stuff. A lot of DMs love being in character and talking. Get out of here. Half the time I just explain what I want to explain. Sometimes doing double duty, I'll say what I want to say and then actually say it in character and so on and so forth. But yeah. When you have that problem, when you have that session 0, you know that you have a problem because of that framework. If everybody should already be on the same page, and you say, "Hey, let's play Dungeons and Dragons."
What are they negotiating? As someone that loves games and that plays games, I just like, what are they negotiating?
The typical session 0, at least for relatively well-adjusted people, I'm not going to talk about 2021 Seattle. All right, when we're talking normal people, or at least normal gamers who want to play D&D, it's things like, "Hey guys, so I've got a few different game worlds or campaign settings I'd like to play, or in some cases, there's a couple of different games I want to run. Do we want to do a cyberpunk thing, or do we want to do?" And then when you pick a game, let's say in this example D&D, it's along the lines of, "Cool, well, character creation takes a long time. Let's start creating characters, and we'll sort of talk about who's going to be in the party, and make sure that some people like to metagame and say, oh, well, let's have a well-balanced party. Like, you can't go anywhere without a cleric, right? That sort of thing." And then there are other people who are like, "Yeah, let's make sure that the characters are going to mesh, because if we're going to be an adventuring party, a group of heroes, the super friends, then we'll do, hey, let's make sure that our characters' alignments or personalities aren't going to clash too much, right? Like, ultimately, we want to get together." Yeah, Sky said it. Yeah, usually party construction. Oh, we need a healer, etc. Yeah, exactly. That's what session 0 in D&D sense usually means. So it's sort of like picking the milieu. Let's get our characters together. Let's get the party together. It's not as bad as you think, but yeah, I find it largely to be a waste of time. Roll 3d6 straight, get your character, and go.
I thought session 0 was for spending all the gold, because that's the longest and most boring part of creating a character. is looking at all those little lists and trying to figure out how much stuff costs, and then wasting money from your character sheet to buy all the crap you need.
Like even with something like BX, which is as simple as you can boil down D&D and still be well, close to D&D anyway. Like, I would run that for just random people, whoever would come in off the street, or convention games and things like that. But like to just have people sit down, they can't make any. They can learn about the game through rolling up characters together, but like normal people, they don't know what they want, right? They don't know. They have no idea. Why are you asking role players what they want? That's the last people who would know. You're talking. Most people, they're not going to figure out that, oh, the sleep spell. If we should get the sleep spell, they don't know that. They have no idea which one's the best spell. Every decision that you give to the people at that stage is just detracting from the game.
Yeah.
Like if you like playing D&D, you'll like playing D&D as an assassin. You'll like playing D&D as the paladin. If you like playing D&D, you'll like playing almost any type of character in any type of group. And the fun's going to be, what's the fun going to come from, right? From you having like felt out everybody to make sure they're all okay with this particular set of characters that are going to, like, that just needs to die. Like that has, if you play D&D, you will explore many roles, and then you will discover what you actually like as opposed to what you think you like. So I'm going to say even this less noxious type of session zero that you're throwing out there, I'm going to say Trollopolous demonstrates that it's flawed. It's assuming that you know what you're going to be doing 3 weeks from now, which in a real campaign you have no idea. So
yeah, I'm with you 100% on that. I personally prefer the randomness of the dice. Like, just give me a level 1 player character and I'll start playing. Right? As you said, D&D is fun. Let's play D&D.
Yep.
People who play D&D, and these are the sort of things that if you've been following, have you been following Brian Niemeyer's blog?
Oh, certainly, absolutely.
Yeah, he's been talking about this in terms of stories and TV shows, but this is where your research overlaps with his observations on people's needs for self-reflection. They want input into the character creation process. They want to feel good and creative, and I want to make a cool fantasy hero for this setting. I'm going to be an elf who runs through the forest and casts magic spells and lives with the fairies and blah, 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 right? They dream this stuff up and they want to make that. Or, oh, I'm so glad you're starting a new Dungeons & Dragons game. I've got this Dragonborn Sorcerer template I've been wanting to try out, and I'm so glad to have a game where I can try my own special snowflake build and blah, blah, blah. That's not me.
They're pawns.
Yeah.
D&D characters are pawns in a game.
I disagree slightly, but I think when you get off of that idea of I am just this character, they don't have to be pawns, right? But instead, hey, I'm playing this character, but this is just one hero or one soldier among many, right? I think there's a middle ground, but go ahead. You're making a point.
Oh no, the problem with special snowflakeism is and you see this in over elaborate combat rules, so that because like the argument's always going to be, well, the magic user isn't equally important in the combat as the fighter who's doing all this stuff. And so there's like up through 4th edition, you'll see this, like, I want everybody to be equally important in every stage of the game. And what that usually means is turn the game into combat and lose everything else, right? So the what was the thing again? What's the question?
I don't remember. I was just rambling.
Oh, well, dang it. But the special snowflakes, right?
Oh yeah, the special snowflakes who they love
D&D, this is the most. I think this is the most important thing to come out of the Trollopolous game is that there are about 6 or 7 different modes of play, and the different classes, particularly the weird classes in AD&D, like the druid and the ranger and the assassin, they are built around the assumption that all of these modes in play will be significant in the campaign. And until you have the aha moment where you see these modes and you're like, holy crap, all of these modes coexist and we can like transition between them even in the same session, or in the pregame or everything else. When you get there and you see that these character classes tap into that, that's a point where you really begin to see D&D for what it is, as opposed to what's been imposed on it.
Okay. That's a great place to wrap it up. But are there anything else in your notes that we need to go over before calling it?
No, I think this is it.
This is it. That was
great. Definitely shout out to John Mollison, who has made several videos on these topics, things that would have stayed in the BroSR chat forever. He's brought out and put in a format that regular people can get excited about and relate to. Obviously, definitely Sky here, who like showed me this that playing real D&D could be done, and Mephrodis for memeing us into a respect for the AD&D game when it wasn't cool. That's definitely big. Who else is really big in here? Bradford Walker, who's been following very closely all of these developments here, and I think he's seen some of the implications of this type of gaming probably before even I did. His blog is definitely one to follow. As far as other games that are doing what we're talking about here, One-to-One Time would have been just this weird thing I did in 2020 if it wasn't for B-Dubs 1776. If you check out his blog, B-Dubs and Dragons, he's running with Axe. Now, I didn't give anyone permission to run game systems other than AD&D or OD&D, but he's gotten some fantastic results and a fantastically long in a living campaign, a thriving campaign, by applying One-to-One Time to the Axe system. And his players are just super excited, super loyal, and he has to beat them off with a stick. Furthermore, he has a different style of game mastering to mine, and values different things. He has different strengths. Maybe, I'm not going to say he has any weaknesses, but definitely different strengths. So seeing how some of these ideas play out when you got a different personality driving it, super important, super valuable. And also, like, the competition, they can't touch 30 plus session reports that break down how this stuff actually works. They're just not going to do it. So not sure who we left out. Hopefully nobody. But those are definitely some people you want to check out. And then finally, Chanticleer, who is the guy who broke who established patron style play, Braunstein style play. He integrated it with one-to-one play. He proved that it had legs, that it was a really great idea, that it was a really surprising idea when you put those two things together. He actually, I don't like talking about this. It's a little bit embarrassing to me, but he learned One-to-One Time by playing in B-Dub's game, and then he went and applied it to a 5th edition Waterdeep campaign. And on the one hand, I'm embarrassed that anyone playing 5th edition was doing something cool. But on the other hand, I can report to you that when he applied these ideas to that game, the campaign world of Waterdeep and Forgotten Realms it catalyzed with these ideas, and it immediately, or not immediately, but it very quickly became so alive, so rich on its own, that he's basically working in an original campaign world at this point, at this time. It's water deep in name only. He probably needs to come up with a new name for his campaign now, if you ask me. And probably maybe even switch to AD&D. I don't know if he's ready for that.
Return. Sounds good. That's a great list of people and blogs. I'm looking at Beat Dubs and Dragons now. Low frills axe session reports, old school internet 1.0 stuff. I love it. And I got your Twitter link in the description. Is that the best place to see what you're up to?
That is absolutely the best place.
Okay, cool. I'm out of questions. We're out of time. Daddy Warpig, do you have any other questions for Jeffro?
Not on the air.
Not on the air. All right, we're going to ask you about your personal stuff later, I guess. But I'm done for today. I am going to take a moment to thank you guys for hanging out for an extra long special episode. Jeffro, it's always good to have you on. We'd love to have you back sometime.
Thank you.
Shout out to chat. I'm not going to name names because everybody who's here today. Love the lively discussion there from our unusually handsome and intelligent audience. And I hope everybody listening later really enjoyed the discussion of D&D today. And that's it for me this week. Daddy Warpig, take it away.
All right, folks. Again, thanks everybody who showed up live, participated in the chat. Thanks everybody who will be listening later. We are available on youtube.com/Geek Gab. That's youtube.com/Geek Gab. We're also available in the iTunes Store, SoundCloud.com, and the Google Play Store. It has been mentioned to me that Amazon also has a podcast directory, and I suppose we should get around to looking into that. Which I guess I should maybe kind of indicate that I might get around to doing sometime. But don't quote me on that. Thanks, everybody, for coming in. We are signing out for today. But don't you worry. Don't you fret. We will be back.